Good evening and welcome to the TalkWrite podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Stennett, and we've got a really cool show tonight. Author Landon Beach is with us, and he just wrote a book called Narrator, and then he had a narrator narrate it, and the narrator helped him write it. So we got a great discussion coming up. Nick, why don't you take over and introduce our guests?
You can tell I'm good at this.
We have unmute your microphones.
Everybody unmute. So we have with us Landon Beach, who is the author of the popular Great Lakes Saga and the Sunrise Side Mystery Series, as well as his latest book, which you can see over his shoulder there once he talks, called Narrator. Landon is a Michigander living in Florida. He's a former naval officer. We'll be asking him about that, and an educator for a decade and a half. We also have his narrator, Scott Brick. And in addition to narrating for Landon Beach, Scott has some other names on his resume that you might be familiar with. Lee Child, Clive Cussler, Michael Crichton, Frank Herbert's Dune, which I'm particularly fond of. And Scott has narrated hundreds and hundreds of audiobooks over the years from some of the biggest writers out there. He's an audiophile golden voice, Publishers Weekly Narrator of the Year, twice running, over 50 earphone awards, 2 audio awards, and a nomination for a Grammy Award. You might even have more than that, because I got that from Wikipedia. Finally, Scott has created his own audiobook recording studio with the best name in the world, Brick by Brick Audiobooks. Without a doubt, it's just a fantastic name. Love it. Although I gotta also say, Brick and Beach, Beach and Brick, that's also a good combo.
Totally works.
So let's
before we get too far, a little housekeeping item. We forgot to mention this earlier. Jordan just posted a link to this YouTube live stream. So if you want to share that with your social media, go ahead and do that. And go ahead.
Well, let's start with Landon, who is, by the way, a brand new entrant into the tropical authors. His books might not be the most tropical, but I think if you are a member of Tropical Authors, you know that we focus on the maritime as much as anything. So we thought he'd be a good addition. So you have been writing, can you tell us a bit about, I guess, the Great Lakes Saga series, which is what I think really sort of launched you and got you in front of our eyeballs. And then we'll move on to hear a bit about Narrator soon.
Sure. Well, Wayne and Nick, it's just a delight to be with you tonight. And also, I'm honored to be asked to join the Tropical Authors group. As you said, I started the Great Lakes Saga, and it is not a series, but it is a set of 5 standalone novels, and I'm done with 4 of them already. And what I did was I set one novel on each Great Lake. And so in terms of the tropical author kind of audience, the only ones that really fit in that lane are the Sail and the Wreck, because different within the saga. And so the Wreck is a treasure hunting mystery for the Holy Grail of Great Lakes shipwrecks, the Griffin, and that's set on Lake Huron. And the Sail is a doomed father and son journey around Lake Superior. And then we move to Lake Ontario, and the Cabin is about, it's a political espionage thriller. And then an organized crime thriller that I wrote for Lake Erie is The Hike. And I like to say that's Breaking Bad meets The Godfather. And so you have different genres. And then the last one, which I'll write in a few books, is called The Bay. That'll be set on Lake Michigan. And so when I'm done, it'll be 5 standalone novels that share a little bit of DNA, but that's what I set out to do. So I'm almost there, one to go.
That was a question I had, because since they are standalones, but are they in the same world? Would a protagonist in one of your books possibly know somebody from one of the other books?
They are all different protagonists. There are a few minor characters here and there that show up, but not very often. So they are true standalone novels. So I always like to make that clear, especially on my Amazon page and my web page, that if you're expecting to see the same character over and over again, it is not a traditional series at all. But I did write them in a way which has been difficult but fun. But for loyal fans that started from the beginning, if you read them in the the date that they were released. There are a few callbacks that I sneak in here and there, but they are not essential to the plot. Just a little wink to some loyal readers. But no, they are standalones, and as Scott will tell you, no one is safe. Sometimes they make it in the end, and sometimes they don't.
Definitely, definitely great stories too.
Thanks,
Well,
Wayne.
Scott, how did you meet up with Landon? How did you find yourself narrating his first book?
Well, Landon approached through my website, and that's administered by a dear friend of mine, my friend since high school, and now my production coordinator, Gina Smith. And I'm not really good at multitasking. When I'm working, you know, and so she will handle the interactions with authors, either of something I'm working on or maybe an upcoming project. And in this case, she said, hey, a guy got in touch. He has a series of 5 books. I want to say at the time, the first 3 had been written, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe the first 2. And so he was able to send us, you know, these manuscripts to take a look at. And I've let her know kind of what I don't want to sound like too, you know, hoi polloi or anything, but, you know, too highfalutin, but there are certain subjects I don't want to talk about, you know, genres I don't want to work in. You know, there was a wonderful book. It was about child abuse, and I'm like, you know, I'm sorry, I really don't want to live with that for a week. But she said, as she's looking through it, and she's like, yeah, no, it does. There's no red flags. Doesn't tick any of those boxes. And by the way, they're really freaking good. So I took a look, and I was like, yeah. And we, you know, of course, we had to work it out because there was at least 2 books written at the time. Landon, you could correct me, but I knew that we had to talk about recording the first 3 on a certain schedule. And as soon as we could agree to that, I was like, absolutely, I'd love to be involved with these.
Yeah, I'll say this, Nick, that was the most nerve-wracking week of my career when Gina emailed me back and said, Scott is reading the rec, and we'll let you know if we're going to move forward. I'm like,
which seems
and
really
I still remember the day
it?
that I got the email, because I had looked into Scott as a narrator, and there's a whole longer story behind why I was really interested in working with Scott, and it was just a dream come true. But the short version is I saw that he was ahead of the game in terms of being an audiobook entrepreneur, and he was working with just a few indies. But I looked at the indies he was working with, and they were million copy sellers. And so I was at the start of my career, but I had entered a few international contests with the Clive Cussler Writers Contest. And the rec was a semifinalist, and then the sale ended up making the top 3. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, it's now or never to put my resume out there and see if he was interested. And as he said, I had the first 3 books, and that was our original agreement, was to do those 3, and then we'll move on from there. So yeah, it was I don't want to play it up or play it down too much, but it was a life-changing moment to get that email back and know that we were going to get to work together.
Well, I have to admit, when I first saw one of your books pop up in the also boughts for some of our tropical authors, and I pulled it up, my first one was, holy crap, he's got Scott Brick. This guy's got some octane. So that, because I've known Scott's work since the beginning, and boy, you got a score there. So congrats.
Yeah, I'm still standing on his shoulders.
Okay, listen, guys. I'm giving you no more than 35 more minutes to stop saying nice things about me, and then I'm going to cut you off. But by the way, Nick, it really is wonderful to see you again. It's been a long time.
It has. We used to go to little parties and drink a bit too much and sit in the back and enjoy beers with other narrators.
No idea what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll segue right into it. I haven't had this in a while. Do you
I'm just
have
gonna sit back and listen? This is great.
Look, drinking in the booth. What could go wrong?
So when I finish a really big, hard project, because in a way this sort of tastes like burnt Band-Aids, and it's just not something I can have a lot of. But if I keep it for a special occasion, like 30 hours,
Oh, that one's so peaty and so good,
Oh my
Nick.
God,
Oh,
it's so
and
toasty.
Islay. Oh,
I always like to say Lafroig is more peaty than the Little Rascals dog,
Oh, that's good.
right?
And
I'm proud
and
of
it
that
was
one.
an audiobook, a Bill Pronzini, where the nameless character was having a, and then I had to look it up. I'm like,
Yeah.
how do you pronounce this? And then I went out and bought it.
Good man.
Let's see. Let me ask another Landon question here. You also have the Sunrise Mystery Series, and that is a series?
so the first book was Huron Breeze, and it was a departure. We had finished the hike, and Scott and I were talking about, yeah, we're only one book away here from finishing the Great Lakes Saga. But then I had a friend who challenged me and said, why don't you try writing a classic murder mystery, and still set it in Michigan? And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot, just to take a little bit of a break. And it was only planned as a standalone, because that's usually what I write. And I wrote it, and the reception from it was really positive from my readers. And the way that I had written it is, there's an author who is 3 books into writing a 6-book series as my protagonist. And I had talked to my editor and talked to Scott, and I said, I think I can turn this into a trilogy, because Huron Breeze was all about her trying to write book 4. And so there were books 5 and 6. And so I decided to turn it into a trilogy. One, I really loved the character. And I think murder mysteries and detectives usually lend themselves really well for series. But I don't think I'll go any further than that. I mean, you never say never. But the one that I'm working on right now is Huron Nights. And then the final book in that trilogy will be Huron Sunrise. And so that's how that came about. I didn't plan it to be a series. I just wanted to see if I could write a murder mystery. But it's going to end up going down that way. And I'm writing those books back to back. I think it'll just be a little bit easier staying with the same character, and then finally get back to the Bay for the Great Lakes Saga.
And when
And
it
can I
comes to
ask-
series,
go ahead.
don't limit yourself on a trilogy or a quad or whatever. Originally, I was going to write 3 books with Jesse McDermott, and that was Fallen Palm, Fallen Hunter, and Fallen Pride. And then I got a whole ton of email asking backstories about this character and that character. So I whipped out a quick prequel, and it became book 1. And then along came book 5, and then 6 and 7, and now 24. So if it's doing well, there's no reason to stop at 3. Yeah. Keep on.
It's really
keep on.
sage advice. Thanks, Wayne.
Now,
We
on
got
the
a
other
question.
hand, you've moved to Florida. So have you considered setting something in Florida?
Yes, I have a book that will fall in the tropical author lane, and it's about 3 books away. And I've been wanting to write it for a long time, but I've got a little work to do before then. But over behind me, I've got a 2-foot stack of research books to look at before I go into it. So yes, there will be at least one.
Before we go any further, because our audience on YouTube is now starting to talk to one another, and the questions are rolling by pretty quick. There's actually several really good questions here. And B for Bell, I think his name is Travis. Is that right? I'll know in about 15 seconds because there's a delay. But he writes, is that how narrators get a copy of the script? In the book, it's given to him by his agent on a laptop or an iPad, he doesn't remember, and then signs receipt of it. Is that normally how it happens?
Well, yes and no. The way it's described in the book is it's described that way because it's such a high-profile project. Ordinarily, 90% of the work that I do, 95% of the work that I do, it's emailed to me. I don't have to, I don't have to do anything. I think the most I've ever been asked to do as far as security goes is sign an NDA, which is fine. But my buddy Paul Michael records the Da Vinci Code books, and
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I've spoken to Jim Dale a number of times about recording the Harry Potter audiobooks. And in both of those circumstances, both narrators were either flown to New York, or I don't know, Jim might have been living there at the time, put up in a hotel near the studio, escorted into a conference room at the publisher, given a hard copy of the script, meaning actual pages, even though we typically work, we work from pads, tablets. They have to read, 100 pages at a time, make their notes, write them down longhand, carry those into the studio the next day, record the 100 pages you read last night, go back to that same conference room the night before to read as much as they can get ahead, and continue to do that. The version that Landon wrote was kind of a more digitized version of that. But look, I can tell you, I have been it was Random House at the time. It's before the merger. Now they're Penguin Random House. But I was at the Random House facilities in Westminster, Maryland, where they actually print the books themselves. And I want to say it was when the 4th book came out, maybe the 5th. And I saw pallets full, literally just pallets, stacks of books as tall as me. And they were wrapped in shrink wrap around the entire pallet. And they had 4 armed guards at all the stations of the compass, looking with their back to the pallet and looking outward 24 hours a day. Those things are a license to print money, and they don't play around when you're working on a project that high caliber, which in the book, as Landon wrote it, that's what Sean Frost was doing.
And
So,
Nick, that was one of our points of,
it does happen.
That was one of our moments of collaboration as well, because I thought that would be so neat to write a scene like that from what had happened with the Da Vinci Code, but we could never quite get it where Sean didn't stay in the booth. He had to go somewhere because of ultra security. So I borrowed actually from that scene when Damon Lindelof was brought in to rewrite Prometheus. He got a call from Ridley Scott. Well, it was actually someone who worked for Ridley Scott, and he said, dude, Ridley Scott's going to call you in 1 minute. And so he's waiting there by his phone. He gets called by him, and he said, somebody's going to drive to your house. They're going to deliver a script to you, and they're going to park on your street and wait outside. You're going to read it, and then they're going to collect it from you. And then I want you to come in and see me and tell me what you think. And he and John Spates both ended up getting a writing credit for it. So it was a little bit of synthesis of that for what I wanted to pull off, and what Scott and I thought would be neat to keep it, confidential, but yet Sean wouldn't have to leave his own booth.
Yeah, well, I like the idea that it's all sort of self-contained on a tablet. Not to give too much away, but what's being described right now is in the first chapter of the book. I thought that was great. I mean, you could probably have it coded. You can't open it; it won't open after another day or whatever. I thought that was really cool, and we can't really spoil why it was kept from him, because I guess Sean Frost got the other books in this series probably without the same level of protection. It was just this particular book.
Right.
Well, let me ask some questions about Sean Frost. What I really liked, and if any folks listening to this, there's so much awesome audiobook inside baseball in this, and some stories where I'm like, is this something that Scott does, or is this related to the apocryphal thing I heard about that narrator? So I'm just curious about some of the booth rituals. Yeah, the booth rituals are marvelous. Okay. One thing Sean uses is a tally counter. Like if you go somewhere to like a fair or something, and they're just see? So he actually has a tally counter. That's so high tech. I just snap my fingers.
Right.
But he's got
what this is. Counter?
Well, bring it down again.
Scott, do you want to tell them how we collaborated on that part?
Yeah. So what this is, you'll see that every time this is clicked, you might be able to see that the number changes. It goes up 1 every time. And the main reason these are used is so that when, let's say a band is playing at a smaller venue, you know, it's not Madison Square Garden, it's not the Staples Center or the Forum in LA. It's a smaller venue, and you need to keep track of how many people are inside. Maybe for, you know, fire code reasons, you can't have more than 200 people. Every single time somebody walks in, it clicks and the number changes. Well, Nick and I, you know, Nick snaps his fingers, and the reason he does that is because that will make the waveform, which is recording on our studio computer all the time. You know, it's essentially like an EKG. And when you see this, it looks like the heartbeat, right? Bumps up and down. Well, if you make a mistake, the editor knows to go right there and cut out the last take. So that's why I use it. And to answer Landon's question, that became something of a collaboration. He asked me, you know, can you think of any other ways that we can make this unique, as we were setting about during the recording process? And I said, look, to be honest, as I was reading the manuscript ahead of time, I wasn't thinking along those lines, but I try with every book I do to be open to an inspiration. One time I'm doing a book 20 years ago, the first time I ever did this, the author kept talking about how there was a whole wad of chewing gum in this guy's cheek, and it was affecting the way his mouth sounded. And I'm like, well, if I do that, it's going to sound like I'm doing this, like I'm pulling my cheek out. It doesn't sound authentically like a wad of chewing gum. So I went to the editor and I said, can I put a whole wad of chewing gum in my cheek and just read that character's lines? Just read them out of order? I was asking for permission because I knew he was going to have to do the extra work to cut them up into individual lines and plop them down into the other recording I did, which is everything else in the scene. He said, sure, great, go ahead. So when this came along, the first time that we talk about the tally clicker in the book, of course I'm doing it in the booth as I'm working along, and my engineer is cutting them out, but I suddenly went, wait, when I mentioned a tally clicker, I mean, you know, look, Wayne, you asked what a tally clicker is. Everybody asks what a tally clicker is. And I'm like, okay, for those who've never used one, I emailed Landon and I said, how would you feel if I left a couple of these in when I'm talking about the tally clicker? He said, oh, I love it. And again, hadn't thought about it ahead of time, but there's a couple of things in there. There's a time when late in the book, when I have to take a swish of water, and so I made sure that you can actually hear the crinkle of the water bottle, the plastic water bottle, you know, as I'm grabbing it and then kind of, you know, sloshing it around in my mouth. We talk about me, you know, dabbing my lips with my lip balm. So I made sure to do it like that, with my lips actually out, so it sounds like I'm dabbing it with lip balm. And we looked for opportunities like that as they came along to, let's leave them in. And then of course I had to email our post house and say, FYI, those are there for a reason. Please don't cut them out.
leave the special effects in.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you hear the different tally
The
counter,
engineer's
it's telling
like,
you to
how
keep
do I
the
tell
first
the
tally
difference
counter.
between the reel and the spider?
Right, exactly. I had to give him specific page numbers and the time counts about when it came in. Leave the one in here. You can get rid of all the rest.
Well, you've mentioned the chapstick, the Burt's Bees, and that was one of my other questions. Do you actually do that? Explain why.
I am addicted to lip balm. I don't do the Burt's Bees. I use a company called EOS. And this sounds sacrilegious because my girlfriend, Suzanne Elise Freeman, she's a narrator as well, and she hand makes her own lip balm. But for whatever reason, it doesn't work for me in the booth. I'm like, honey, love you, but I got to go with what works. And this stuff, EOS, it just, the reason I use it, I've got 4 things I primarily use, and I call them my potions in the booth. You know, I'll use visual aids. Let's pretend this is water. When I go a couple of pages, I shut down. I'm going to take a minor break of like 5 minutes, and I drink water, and that's to just lubricate the vocal cords. You know, larynx is a muscle. It will fail without moisture. It will fail without water. Then, oh yeah, okay, we'll pretend that this is tea. And that's
And for our viewers, both our narrator co-host and our narrator guest are in their booths.
Yes. I use the hot tea because if you've ever been to a gymnasium and you have a hot tub and a cool dip, it's because switching temperatures back to back, going from, you know, really cold to really warm, is very good for blood flow. And you know, we need to protect the pipes. So those are the two liquids I use. Then I use the lip balm to cut down on lip smacks, because especially when you're using a P, you will pop your P's. You know, you'll hear a lot of plosives, right? You don't want to. So when I do that, I can go for about 2 pages not worrying about popping those P's. And the last thing I do is, I don't have any in front of me, actually left it out in the other room. I get these breath drops. They're just spearmint peppermint breath drop. It's kind of like Banaka. And I just put one, I get the generic at like Walgreens, and I put 1 drop on the tip of my tongue, and that gets rid of the gunk. Because as Nick can tell you, these microphones we're using are in some cases like $5,000. They are so sensitive, they can hear a gnat fart in the next room. So try talking out loud for 10 minutes and not going, you know, the gunk just builds up. So those breath drops get rid of all the crap on your tongue, and it's just, it cleans you all up, and suddenly I am ready to go for another couple of pages.
I have a similar, I don't use the breath drops, but if I'm having an issue, I get grapefruit juice. I don't swallow it because it's an acid and you don't really want that on your throat. But if you swill grapefruit juice, spit, and then rinse with water, you will have nothing in your mouth. Well, it just annihilates it.
You know, anybody in voiceover will tell you they've heard these stories about, you know, the green apples as well. And look, the same thing can happen. I used to do it when I first got into the industry. It was a trick I learned in speech tournaments when I was in high school. If you had a buddy of mine on an opposing team, he drank like a quart of milk right before going on, and suddenly he had all this gunk on his tongue, and I had to go talk for 10 minutes. And a competitor of his came up, and he had a little McDonald's salt packet, and he put a little bit in his palm. Guy, you know, he licked the tip of his finger, dabbed it into the salt, put it back on his tongue, cut right through.
Wow.
The amino acids, it gets rid of the gunk. And I used to do that until, I swear to God, I had one publisher say, "So can we talk about this white powder you bring into the piece?"
For inspiration, man.
I really don't need this.
Why are you narrating so fast?
Right, yeah, exactly. I swear to God, the last book I ever did that on was a book, I'm not kidding, a book called Salt, A World History by Mark Kurlansky. The last time I ever used salt in the booth was on a book about
genius.
Salt. Yeah.
Well, since you had a visual aid, I don't know if you use this stuff.
That's the tea that I drink.
But now here's the joke. At some point, if I ever do a book with a narrator, I want that to be accidentally picked up from the same company. It does what you think it does.
Yes, right.
Now, and are you familiar with this?
You know, yes, I am familiar, although I've never used it personally.
A lot of singers on Broadway will use this, and I've only used it a few times. Folks who know Wayne Stennett's books, if he decides to give me Rusty Thurman for more than 2 chapters in a row, I have to go use that spray.
Yeah.
Rusty's in the entire book of Castaway. Or Cast Off. I keep calling it Castaway.
Let me see if I have any. Oh, okay. You also, Sean Frost mentions recording an entire book while naked. Now, was that just some fun? Is that based on anything? I mean, I happen to know someone who stripped down to his undies way too often at Talking Books, but I'm wondering if this is something else.
Landon, you want to cover this one first, or should I?
Sure.
The silence is deafening.
There was no piece of research that went into that method narrating, but I did think it would be a little comedic twist and fun to put in there, just from the mind of Sean Frost. So no, not based on any actual knowledge, but I hope it worked.
Thank you for finally putting that on the record.
That has been clarified.
I never have, although I swear to God, knowing this was coming up today, yesterday when I got home, I'd been away for a few times. Suzanne is moving in this weekend, and I'd been over to her apartment, and my air conditioning shut down because it didn't sense anybody walking around in the house. It was 89 degrees indoors. When we've got a heat wave going here in LA. It was 112 degrees outside. It was 89 inside. I was sweating like a freaking pig. And I honestly, for a moment, thought, maybe we make it happen. Maybe we make it happen. I just couldn't.
What would Sean Frost do?
What would Sean Frost do? I ask myself that all the time. And I have to say, one time I found myself in Midland, Texas. I was flown out there by Random House to do a library event. And it was a huge room. There was like 500 people in the room, so there was no way it was going to get filled. And so we were encouraging people to come down towards the center. Well, as I walk up to the podium, I realize that there are two little old ladies dead center right in front of me, basically as far, barely further away than I am from the camera here. And we thought, we had said, come on down closer. We can hear one another better. And one of these little charming old ladies, one of them turns to the other and says, so loud that she knew everybody would hear it. She says, would you do me a favor and ask him if he ever gets excited about them sex scenes he reads? And if so, if he ever gets so excited that he ever records them in the altogether.
Wow.
And I'm usually pretty good at interacting with audiences, but I was like, I don't know what the fuck to say about that. I'm sorry, I don't know if cursing is allowed, but I just did.
It's fine.
That's exactly what I was thinking was, I got nothing on this.
But to your point, Nick, that was part of the fun of the book, was just imagining what some booth rituals might be. And not to give too much away about the beginning, but I thought if you were a narrator and you were really invested in a series and you had something that you did to get you in the mood right before you would narrate that particular book, to get you into your routine and, catching up with an old friend. And Scott was really generous on this point because it would just be more of an exchange of ideas. And it's good that it was book 6, because by then we had a lot of trust established and had become really good friends. Don't think I would have ever had the guts to do it for the first 3 books, but I was a big fan of course, the original Incredible Hulk series with Bill Bixby, and I'm watching it right now with my youngest daughter. And I thought, what if this character in the book was sort of a drifter who helped people solve problems, but never stayed in one place? And I invented the ritual of Sean Frost listening to the Lonely Man theme right before he records. And Scott and I had a fun back and forth, and we've both been so busy, we haven't really exchanged any emails, in this last month. We're kind of coming up for air here. But I was wondering, because he said, I think I'll use this for my next Reacher book. And brother, did that happen? Have you started that yet?
Yeah, it did. Oh yeah, I still have my travel toothbrush. I always bring this into the booth with me when I'm working on a Reacher book, because famously the only thing he travels with, well, now there's a debit card and his travel toothbrush, because it fits in his front pocket. And as we were talking, the character in Narrator is called Nehemiah Stone, and he was described as being this lonely man on the road going from case to case, city to city. And I was like, well, that's Reacher. And so I told Landon, I'm like, next time I do it, which was 2 weeks ago, I was like, I'm going to listen to the Lonely Man. That song is haunting. That melody is haunting. And absolutely, I listened to it before getting started.
So there's a new Reacher coming out?
Yes, there is. It's called No Plan B. We recorded it about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
I've read every one of the Reacher books and
Yep.
huge. I mean, reading Jack Reacher was probably the biggest influence on me writing Jesse McDermott. And I like the character, just the drifter that goes and solves everybody's problem and then moves on. After he stops and throws his clothes in a trash can and buys a new set of clothes.
I just have to push in there that Lonely Man was the first piece of sheet music I ever bought.
Is that right?
I learned piano, and I was playing all this stuff that the teacher gave me, and I was like, I want to get the Hulk music.
I remember right from a previous interview, Scott, wasn't that your ringtone on your phone, but it was too soft and you were missing calls?
Yeah, it was the first time I was able to actually sample a song and use it for my ringtone. And it was so soft. Those opening strains are so soft, I couldn't hear it if it was in my pocket. I missed so many calls. I switched it to Battlestar Galactica, the original Battlestar Galactica theme from the 70s. And one day I found myself working with a producer, an audiobook producer, and out in the valley in LA, and and he says, and we're like at a Denny's grabbing lunch, and my phone goes off. And he hears dun 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 dun, and he goes, "What the hell is that?" And I thought, "Oh, faux pas, rookie mistake. I'm sorry, I'll turn it off." And he goes, "Why did your phone do that?" And I said, "Well, it's my ringtone." And he goes, "No, it's not." I said, "Well, it's a thing. Nowadays we can make a song, a ringtone." And he goes, "You're messing with me." And I'm like, "Why would I mess with you? I barely know you." And he goes, "I produced that soundtrack." And I said, "You are so fucking LA, man. Seriously, I go to lunch and my phone goes off and the guy who produced my ringtone is talking to me. That's crazy."
Now I have to ask the question, Nick, what booth rituals do you have before you start?
Oh, I really don't have that many. I suppose I should have thought about that ahead of time. Mainly going over all the material before I launch into it. All the different characters. I might test out some characters. There might be, if there's a particular dialect that I really don't want to sound too much like a summer stock actor doing an accent, I might spend quite a bit of time listening to like a prime minister from that country, and then immediately to try to start recording while it's in my head. But as far as fun rituals, I do have a little Lefroy at the end of a long book. I sometimes do have some tissues in here if I know that there's something sad coming up. I'm not much of a crier in real life, but there's something about investing yourself in it and really being in the moment with it that puts me I'm a bit of a Vulcan in real life, but that goes out the window when you're in front of the mic.
But did you ever have to use those tissues when you're reading my books?
Yeah.
Really? That's just too cool. I'm sorry.
The fellow with the it's like the third or fourth book, the veteran in the boat.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Fallen Pride.
Fallen Pride. Into that one, and Tankersley when he passes. That got me too.
Oh, that got me too. I mean, I wrote it and then had to.
But I feel like I cheated the question by going off on some schmacting stuff there. Rituals, not really. Just mainly treating myself to something at the end of a long one. That's about it. But I do have a question for Scott that I really want to know the answer to. How do you handle stomach rumbles? Or do you? Are they handleable?
Don't have it here as a visual aid. It's on a chair right out there. But I like to use something called the Brix Borborygmus bumper. Borborygmus, of course, being the technical name for stomach noises. And what it is it's a queen size pillow. king size. Typically, it is wide enough to cover your stomach and the sides,
And on the sides.
because the noise will come out there as well. It is the bane of my existence. I have diabetes, so I have to eat like every couple of hours. And you all know, when you get hungry, your stomach rumbles. After you eat, your stomach rumbles, and you have to be in the booth doing your job. So quite often, I sit here with a pillow over my gut, and I feel like this, like either the Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man or the Michelin Man. Where my arms are out here, just holding down the pillow against my gut. And
Well, I have a large hoodie, and I stuff a huge pillow under this oversized hoodie and zip it up, and then my arms are free. And that actually works pretty well.
Oh,
There you go.
I love that idea.
Although in summer,
Oh God.
Narrator pro tips. This is cool.
Right. Low key pro tips.
I have a question for Landon. Crassus Dynasty, which is the best name ever for a fictional narrator who is known for narrating sci-fi. Is that R.C. Bray?
It is not.
It's not. Okay. I was like, I wonder if this is Bray, because you had him doing a weird book and stuff. I was like, I would hire
But
Bray.
I do want Andy to write Beyond Rigel. And
Oh.
it's funny because Scott is big into sci-fi as I am. And as I was listening to, his proof as he sent it to me, there was just a little bit of extra flair when he's like, Beyond Rigel. I'm like, yes, go Scott.
Well, Bob Bray is a dear friend of mine. I actually taught like the first audiobook class he ever took, which, as I always told him, I won't take any like, percentage of your income, but I will take all the credit, but I've also I actually got to moderate a panel with Bob Bray and Andy Weir about the success of the Martian audiobook. And yeah, I tried to put a little extra flair on Crassus.
Excellent. Crassus Dynasty.
It was beautiful.
I actually thought about changing the his cultural background and perhaps saying Crassus Dynasty. But I didn't.
Dynasty, yes.
Yeah, I didn't want to go that far.
You can hear him correcting someone that says a dynasty.
Right, yeah.
Well, Wayne, I feel like I have some other questions here, but I feel like I'm monopolizing things. Do you have any questions, or do we have any YouTube queries coming in?
The YouTube audience is surprisingly quiet. I think they're just enjoying watching the show. And right now I'm just typing, getting to the QA time. Anything you guys, and that's where I got to stop typing. So I'll just finish it verbally. Anything you guys want to know?
And while they're responding to that, so Landon certainly is a writer, but I when I was doing a little research on what Scott's been up to, other than Brick by Brick, still the best name, I see, in addition to some Shakespearean acting on the boards there, you also are a writer. There was mention of a modern day supernatural thriller, but no title. So is that not out yet? Oh, you're muted at the moment. Oh, there.
Am I okay? Okay.
Yeah, I hear you now.
Yeah, I spent 3 years of my life, before I became a narrator, I spent 3 years of my life as a professional writer. And I think in that time I did 300 magazine articles. I got hired by Morgan Freeman's production company to do a couple of screenplays for them. And I had a play produced, and I love telling stories, whether I'm telling my own or somebody else's. And so I will quite often spend my evenings working on this book. And it's way too long in coming. My agent has been, it's the typical kind of, honey, where is the book kind of interaction. Honey, you're really, really late on the book kind of thing. But yeah, I found out about a murder long ago in a small New England township. It's that long ago. and I used it to inspire a modern day kind of supernatural murder mystery. Working title of the book is Echoes, and I don't know, they'll probably hire like John Lee or Simon Vance to record it, you know, whenever it comes out. I don't know, but yeah, still working.
And you wrote magazine articles about comic book material, science fiction, and toy-related subjects. Are you a collector?
Oh yeah, God, huge. Comics, sci-fi, toys, but I also did a lot of screenplay articles for a couple of film publications. And I don't know, that it was really weird because for years I've been going to Comic-Con in San Diego every year since 1989, and just throwing money down the drain, buying this, buying that. I got Spider-Man #2, I got Fantastic Four #3, I got, you know, all sorts of, you know, like the introduction of the new X-Men. But I'd always looked at my comic book collection as a money pit until suddenly I went, oh, perhaps I can make money off of my collection by writing articles about the subject. So that was, yeah, within a year I had paid for every cent I'd poured into my collection. So
Wow, great.
that well.
So, Nicholas Harvey has a question on YouTube. This is for Landon. Writing a different protagonist for each book is in the series. Do you ever find that you blend some things from one character to another, or do you have an easy time keeping them separated?
No, they are true standalones. And so when I start a new book, I start all the way over from scratch and I build the character. And of course, that takes weeks and months of a lot of work to find out what are the characters' wants, what are the characters' needs, what might happen. And each book takes its own, you know, path and journey of what's going to happen to that character, because I want the audience who reads that book to have no hints, no hedges to know what might happen ahead of time. I want them in from page one and to feel a complete experience by the time they end the book. And so I do treat them separately and build the characters. And for this book, for Narrator, I've never spent 123,000 words inside of one character's mind ever. And so to make Sean Frost come alive and to be him for months on end took a tremendous amount of work. I've never committed, I had never written first person before, and I'd never written first person present. All of my other books were third person. And so that was a big challenge, but ultimately rewarding. And for the present tense, it was because I wanted everybody to feel like this is happening now, right now, and you've got to be on the edge of your seat to find out what Sean will do. And he's a hot mess, but he's a fighter and he's got a big heart. And Scott and I have always talked about this, that it is not Scott Brick, but I always thought that Scott Brick was perfect to play that role. And so there's a distinction there. And I couldn't be happier. I teared up when I heard the first couple of chapters that he did. It was a special collaboration and something I don't think I'll ever forget. So, you know, for Nick, and I know Nick has emailed me a few times, hey buddy, nice to finally talk with you. Every book I start all over again.
I know I get such a, I just have so much fun creating the protagonists and the side characters and all the bit players in a book. But I know Jesse so well. I'm very, very comfortable with him. He's the only, well, other than Charity, and she's just a female version of Jesse. But I'm so comfortable writing from his viewpoint that the time's coming when I'm going to have to start a new series, but I don't want to, and I don't want to give up this character yet.
I empathize with you, Wayne. It's a month beyond, and I still miss Sean Frost. I miss writing about him. He felt, I think Jonathan Kellerman once said to an interviewer. They said, when are you going to be done with this series? And he said, when they're no longer real to him. And for all of us, have written books before, when they feel real, you just don't want to let go. But the book had to end.
Yeah, John McDonald said basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Travis McGee was just as real to him as Jesse is to me. And
Right. And he's been in your head since what, 1984, Wayne?
oh no, long before that. I started reading Travis McGee books when I was in
No, I meant Jesse.
Oh, Jesse, yeah, since 84.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I've lived that long with this guy in my head. And everybody always asks, are you Jesse McDermott? I'm like, hell no. He's 6'3", 230 pounds, big bulging shoulders, got all his hair. I'm Rusty. Rusty and I share the same birthday. We both have white beards and bald head. So that's who I am. I'm Rusty. Right, Nick?
Well, let me ask, what is next for both of you? Landon, you were saying you're going to be working on the fifth lake.
So I'm going to finish Huron Nights, which is the second book in that trilogy. And then I'm going to write Huron Sunrise. And there's a novella in there too that I'm excited to work on with Suzanne Elise Freeman, because I have her in the book and she's just a tremendous talent. And when I thought of Adrian Astra, which is the heroine of the mythical writer Riley Cannon in my book, I heard Suzanne's voice. I mean, I still, you think of your favorite narrators, and like, not only do I want Scott to narrate my books and other books, but all my favorite books, I want Scott to narrate as well. But Suzanne, especially like for the Alien series, she's so amazing at sci-fi that, that part of it is interesting. So I'll write those back to back in the novella, and then I'll finish the Great Lakes Saga with the Bay. And then after that, I'll probably move on to the Caribbean standalone that I'm itching to write and have been for a long time. So still a couple years away, but yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and I can't wait to send those to Scott when they're ready.
Well, at some point, I'm thinking Tropical Authors might need to rope you in. Something that's happened recently, which we didn't know at the time we were doing our episode last month. Timeless hit the USA Today bestseller list. And
kudos, that's amazing, my friend.
One of the things we've been doing, though, in order to put together the different writers, is we need an everyman that is outside of our stories to kind of tie it all together. And I'm thinking that since you are a standalone expert, it might be interesting to have at some point a collaboration where you create the skeleton that the other authors throw their characters onto, since you are good at creating these people out of whole cloth without full series.
It would definitely be interesting. And you and I had talked previously about what is different about my books than other series, and some of them, it's putting an ordinary person in an extraordinary situation. There are no super agents, there's nobody who has special skills. And that's very much from my own blue collar roots of growing up in Michigan, and just those are the things that really, I think, reach readers that are your average everyday person. What would you do in this situation? And you've only got yourself and self-reliance, and that's kind of what I built those on, especially the Great Lakes Saga. I've got some old salts in there.
And Scott, what do you have next on the horizon?
I've got a couple of projects I'm working on. You were mentioning the Dune book, the Dune series. 10 minutes before I logged on here, I was working on the latest installment of that. It's called The Heir of Caladan, which is a prequel about Paul Atreides. So I'll be finishing that up. I do want to say, Landon talked about Suzanne working on the series, and that was another kind of last minute collaboration. I emailed him and I said, in Huron Breeze, they mention this publishing sensation, kind of along the lines of the Twilight Saga, right, or the 50 Shades saga, and that they were narrated by Suzanne Elise Freeman, and she had, I think, a couple of lines of dialogue in the book, and I said, well, she lives with me. Do you want me to maybe have her just come down and sit in the booth and record them? And he was like, yes. So so as not to have that stand out too much, we thought we would ease the listener into the experience by having her do the opening and closing credits, right? So you've already heard her voice by the time she says her first line in the book, and now, you know, he's writing like the book within the book portion. That actually reminds me of something with Narrator. I'm sorry. I think technically I answered the question. I've got the latest Dune book that I'm working on. But in Narrator, can I just say, it was so gratifying and yet weird to see my name mentioned in the book. At one point, Sean Frost is at the Audis and he walks past a table and Landon only uses the last names, and I think there were 5. Brick, Freeman, so me and Suzanne, Porter, Ray Porter, Pat Fraley, one of my dearest friends in the world, and
Simon
Vance.
Yeah.
And all 4 of those people are like 4 of the most important people in my life. And I'm like, wait a minute, did I just pass myself? Sean just walked past this table where I was there. And then at one point, Landon uses this great quote. He says, somebody asked me once what it's like being a famous audiobook narrator. And I'm reminded that a colleague of mine once said, well, it's like being the tallest midget in the room. And I'm like, that's me. I'm the colleague. If Sean is a narrator, I am too, and therefore we are colleagues, and I'm the guy who told Sean Frost that story. So it's already so freaking meta, but the reason I got into this story was to say, Landon was kind enough to dedicate the book to me, and then in the author's note at the end, he has very glowing things to say about me as well. And I'm like, I don't need any help to sound self-centered. and I really don't want to say these words about myself, but also I don't want to be self-conscious. And I hired Ray Porter to record the intro and outro credits, the author's note, and the dedication at the beginning. So technically what that means is I have paid a friend of mine to say nice things about me. And I look forward to that. Well, look, this collaboration has been unlike any other in my career. And you ask about what I'm working on next. Well, I'm working on Dune right now, but I really look forward to the next time when we can suggest things and say, hey, how would it be if maybe we did this? Yeah.
And Nick, it's just been special, especially once we developed into, like you said about you and Wayne, you know, there was a point where you're professionals and you're working, you each have your turf. And, you know, I am not the person to tell Scott Brick how to narrate a book, obviously. But when we became friends, and really good friends after that, it was like nothing else I ever experienced, especially for this book. If you remember the movie Hoosiers, gosh, and it's crazy to think about it, that Jack Nicholson was going to be Coach Norman Dale, and he had a conflict where he couldn't do it. And so another one of my favorite actors, Gene Hackman, slid in, and now you can't think of Hoosiers without thinking about Gene Hackman. Mm-hmm. But there's a point when, you know, he's about ready to take over as the new coach, and the guy that is the naysayer and just does not like him, you know, he looks at him and he says, you know, there's 2 kind of stupids there, mister. There's a guy who gets naked and goes out in the snow and, you know, barks at the moon. And he said, and then there's the guy that does that in my living room. And I'm not making a one-to-one direct parallel here, but I was scared to death even approaching my good friend, Scott Brick, who I've always been in awe of his talent, because Narrator that's his turf. That's where he makes his living and is a recognized expert. And so the research that I had to do beforehand, before I even felt comfortable to approach him and talk to him about this project. And I think in retrospect, one of the funniest stories was when I called him, he was getting ready to do Huron Breeze. And we were talking about maybe some creative decisions and some things that could happen. And then I said to him, I said, Scott, I'd like to interview you. I've got an idea I've been kind of putting around. And by this point, it's been 6 to 12 months of research. And I'm like, here, just shaking. My knees are going up and down. And I said, and he's like, sure, what is it? And he's working on stuff and looking down. And I said, well, I'm thinking about this narrator that might get kidnapped and tortured. And his eyes are like, he looks at me. And I had 10 questions, and I really credit Wayne with this at the beginning of my career. When he read The Wreck and The Sale, he gave me a lot of great advice about research and, making it authentic. And even if you think that readers might skip over a little bit, you still want to be true to what can happen in the natural world. And I really credit Wayne a lot with that in some of my early interactions. And so I got through 4 of 10 questions, and I think everything's going well, right? And the power goes out. and I'm sitting here in the dark in my room, and I'm like, what is Scott Brick thinking right now? And 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh my gosh, power, please come back. I want to explain myself. I want to say, buddy, I really have done my research, and I haven't told him that yet. And finally, it took a half an hour maybe, and I get on an email, and there's just the quick one from Scott, because he's busy, he's got stuff to do, and I'm East Coast time, he's Pacific time, and he's just like, hey buddy, sounds great, bye. And then it was probably 3 or 4 months later when I finally had the draft ready to show him, and I'm just like, Scott, do you want to read Narrator?
And I think I want to say, I don't remember if it was me who said no. It was our friend Josh. My friend Josh is married to Rachel Jacobs, a narrator, and he's not a narrator himself, but he knows the world because they're married, right? And so he came over for the Indy 500, and we're sitting there watching it in my living room, and I have a hard copy of Narrator. And so, like the artwork over Landon's shoulder, right? He sees that image and he says, can I look at this? I said, sure. That was when I was going through the manuscript. I'm like, yeah, sure. Knock yourself out. And he's looking through it like he's paying more attention to it than the race. And finally he says, can I borrow this? I said, absolutely. Which of course I'm looking at it as a good sign. And that, somebody's read the first 20 pages and needs to know what happens next. And finally he turns to me and he goes, you know you're going to die this way, right? I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, no, this is a blueprint. Somewhere out there's somebody who's gonna, I'm like, ixnay, buddy, ixnay, but look, I found that to be just so compelling. And I can say firsthand, from a lot of back and forth conversations, either via Zoom or email, the smallest thing, Landon would get in touch and say, is this the way it would be? So at one point he says, is there a record button? Is there an actual button? Do you say the words, I hit record and then I move on? I hit the record button and then I move on. And I said, to be honest, it's software, it's not hardware. So there is no record button. But we quite often say, I hit record and I move on. And so he made the change. He wanted to make sure it was completely, Wayne, following your advice, he wanted to make sure that the research was impeccable. And it really was. There was a scene in there where at the Audies, not to give anything away, it's at the beginning, but there's a woman who wins an award for reading a memoir written by a man, the best narration of the year by a female. And I said, hey, hate to tell you, memoirs written by a man are going to be read by a man, narrated by a man, and vice versa. The the industry is very gender and ethnicity centric. And he said, Landon said, you know, thematically, I really like the idea of it happening. What if I was to talk about how this would ordinarily not happen in the world of publishing? And I was like, great, just address the elephant in the room. And that way, nobody who was a narrator, Nick, I know you gave a blurb for it, you know. I know that as a result of that, you were like, oh, yeah. I
don't want to give away whose book it was, but it was perfect how you did that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and two, because of the nature of what Scott's friend said, I had fans that emailed me and they said, is Scott okay? You know, with what happens
like
before Sean Frost. And I said, I assure you, Scott's fine, ellipses.
Ray Porter.
Guys, we are into overtime.
Oh, we are way over, yes.
And Jordan warned me before we started that she's very hungry and there's only going to be a 5-minute after party at best. And we've already eaten into that time. I want to thank you guys, Landon and Scott, both of you, for being on here. This was a really, really fun, interesting discussion. And Nick, as always, you're a giant among men. And I'd like to thank everybody who buys our books and listens to our audiobooks, and our sponsors, Down Island Press, Down Island Publishing, Aurora Publicity, How Not to Sail. Which one am I forgetting?
Pirate Radio.
Pirate Radio, and used to be Cruising Outpost, and it's now Latitudes and Attitudes once again. And anyway, it's been a lot of fun, guys, and we really appreciate you being on here with us, especially on short notice. We just booked you guys, what, 3
like
weeks
10
ago?
days ago or something.
But thanks a lot.
So
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us on.
So glad we can make this happen. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.